Everyone, before we get started, I wanted to ask you guys a question. Do you like World of Tanks? I know I do. Part chess game, part first-person shooter, World War II content, World War I content, interwar content, tanks galore. We have real tanks. We have prototype tanks. We have Cold War tanks, World War II, tanks everywhere. We even have tanks with wheels. We have tanks like that right there. The infamous, or is it famous? I don't know. T-34, 85, the Russian tanks, the American tanks. There's tanks everywhere. Do you know someone who might like that as well? If you do, friends, family, colleagues, whatever, check out the link down in the description right there. Send that to right over to one of your friends or colleagues or relatives and get them involved in World of Tanks. And then when you have an argument at Thanksgiving or whatever, you can jump in and say, let's settle this on the battlefield. Or even Platoon, that's even better. Let's be friendly about it. Check it out. Check out the game. Let's grow this community. Here's the video. We'll see you guys later. Yo, this is Guido coming at you with the Tactics Talk. Welcome back. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. I hope you're having a fantastic day. And today we're going to talk about Frontline. Specifically, my favorite tanks at Tier 9. Did you know Frontline has Tier 9s? I think most of you did. But if you didn't, they do have Tier 9s and Frontlines now. As a matter of fact, that's starting today, so check it out. Where do you get the Tier 9s? Well, you can't start with the Tier 9s. You have to wait until the attackers grab the second level, or at least one of the zones of the second level. You can see it right down here in my garage. It's a D, E, or F on the maps. There are the maps. Check it out. Alrighty, so that being said, what should you value? What should you value in a Tier 9 tank for Frontline? Well, we're going to talk about heavies, mediums, TDs, and light tanks. As a general rule, the same things you value in the Tier 8s you've been playing. Think of things like the Progetto 46, the Barask, the various tanks that you like. You're going to want mobility. You're going to want accuracy. Burst for the autoloaders is always a nice thing. And we're going to open it up just a little bit, though, at Tier 9, because one of the reasons we're going to put Tier 9 in the game is for the defenders to have a little bit more of a stout defense. And that's going to bring into play some of the slower tanks, especially when you start talking the last few zones where you have the gun emplacements to take out. The defenders are going to have a little bit of an advantage by picking such things as T95s and Tortoises. So let's get started on my favorite, or what I believe to be the best, Tier 9 Frontline tanks, starting with the heavies. Slight special case on the very first one is going to be the Sturv K, which is the first Tier 9 premium tank. I include this, and it is a heavy. I include this because it is a premium. And Frontline has traditionally been a mode that people like to use to get experience and especially credits. You are going to get that sweet, sweet premium credit action out of the Sturv K. So I'm going to include it on the list. Sturv K heavy tank is one of the best Tier 9 tanks for Frontline. Let's look at the rest of the heavies. Concept 1B, heavy tank, American, Tier 9, is going to bring several things that are fantastic for Frontlines. Good gun depression, a very good turret, and enough mobility and armor to get around the map and survive some hits. -10 on the gun depression, very fast aiming time, pretty good dispersion at 0.35. With the way I have mine set up, 2,597 average DPM. Pretty good armor, but you're seeing that really small turret, which is difficult to hit. Because the maps are so big, a smaller turret for the hold down spots is very nice, especially for some of those long range shots that you may be taking or trying to defend from, specifically by bouncing it off of the turret. And the mobility is actually pretty good with a 45 km/h top speed for a heavy tank. So my first choice for heavy tanks is going to be the reward tank, Concept 1B. Staying with the Americans, we're going to roll right into the AE Phase 1, which is really an analog in a lot of respects to the Concept 1B. Good turret, nice mobility, good gun depression at -10, I believe it is. We go back here, yes, -10, and about a 2,500 average DPM. Another heavy that will get around the map, because they are such large maps, really nicely, and has a pretty darn good turret at 292 millimeters, decent hull. And like I said, the mobility is great. You're running around, in this case 35, so a bit slower than the AE Phase 1, but just a great all-rounder. Prioritizing that kind of all-round capability on Frontline is extremely important, so my second choice at tier 9 is going to be the AE Phase 1 now. But Guido, you might say, I have given you 2 reward tanks. Well, let's go ahead and take a look at some tech tree tanks on the heavy side that I recommend for Frontline. Alright, the first one I'm bringing is the T10 Soviet Power. This is a nice, fast, heavy tank, more of a medium speed. I'm again prioritizing the mobility to get around the large maps. Plus it hits pretty hard and has a decently accurate gun actually for a Soviet tier 9 at 0.35 with my setup, 2.56 on the aiming time, and slightly north of 2500 average DPM with this setup right here. Okay on the turret at 250, which is pretty nice for those hold down spots that you're going to find on those maps. And then let's take a look at that juicy mobility at 50 kilometers an hour. I find this to be a great all-rounder. The one weakness you might find here that will make it a little bit difficult to work on some parts of the maps is only a -5 gun depression. And while that's a small knock, I like the mobility and overall decent turret plus okay turret armor for this heavy for Frontline. So the Soviet T10 Armored Beast. Let's change it up a little bit. We'll bring the French into the fray here, and this time with that nice burst damage, the AMX 50-120. Also a fast, heavy tank. If we come down here and look at the speed, this bad boy is doing 65 kilometers an hour. And remember that you've got that burst damage on this with the autoloader with the AMX 50-120. So think things like the Lorraine 40T or 5100 that you might use at tier 8. Just up tier this to tier 9, and this is a lot of firepower that can get around the large maps very quickly. -9 gun depression is still very nice. 0.32 dispersion, that's going to make this thing a fairly decent sniper actually with the autoloader. You're going to love that as well. 2.24 on the aiming. The armor's not that great, but this is more of your mobile burst dump damage kind of tank out there. So I also like the 50-120 French heavy tank for Frontline. The next tech tree tank is a good one, the British Conqueror. The little cousin to the Super Conqueror is the tier 9 regular Conqueror. You'll also notice that you have a Frontline rental, so that's also very nice for those who may not have a lot of tier 9s. There will be a rental available as well. And this is more of the brawling beast kind of a tank. Got a very, very strong tank, very strong turret. I mean, great gun depression at -10. Aim time at 1.77 and 0.31 dispersion makes this one of the better snipers of the heavies out there. But that turret armor and that ability to go hold down with -10 gun depression is going to make this thing very, very useful. And it actually has fairly decent mobility. We come over here and take a look at that, and we're doing 34.3 as a top speed right there. So I really like the Conqueror as well at tier 9 heavy. What I haven't talked about are some of the heavier ones, like an E75 potentially out there with the heavy armor, or things like an AMX M451 or the Object 705. Some of those other things like that, perhaps the ST1. You might want to think about these kinds of tanks when you are on defense and you need that real heavy hitter to hold off the hordes as they're attempting to destroy your turrets. But I'm not going to include them as an overall general great one for Frontline. They are very situational. Let's move on to the mediums and see which ones I like there. Much like the heavies, we're going to start with a couple reward tanks first. And the first one I like for Frontline is the KPZ-52. This is a great all-rounder, a German reward tank at tier 9. Has pretty good turret armor, decent depression at -8, but I love the gun at 1.83 aiming time and 0.3 dispersion with a nice DPM of 2781 based on my setup right here. Your results may vary. The speed is pretty good. We're looking at, we'll get to it, 60 kilometers an hour right there. And this is just a fantastic all-round medium tank for Frontline. It's going to get you where you need to go. It's going to bring the damage when it gets there. The gun is nice. The depression is good. Just a great all-rounder for Frontline. One of my favorite tier 9 Frontline tanks. The second one is the Char Future 4. This thing is bringing 4 shells at 390 alpha, absolutely dropping the pain on people, and lots of mobility. So another reward tank at tier 9. This is a French tier 9 reward tank. The Char Future 4, an absolute beast. As far as large maps and mobility and being able to get around to people's side and just dump a lot of pain on them, this is probably one of the best tanks in the Frontline game right here, the char feature. Now remember, the intra clip is quite long, so it does take a while to shoot. You're not going to jump out and go bang, 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 bang. It's going to take a little while to get those shots downrange. But because Frontline is such a, in general, target-rich environment, you gotta love having 4 390 shells within about 16 seconds headed downrange. And again, because the maps are so big, generally you can get away and hide and get your reload going on. And of course, that mobility is just really nice with the char. He is running around at 60 kilometers an hour. You're going to be able to get into trouble and then get out of trouble nice and fast. And who doesn't like 390 alpha drops coming down on people's head? This is a closer, and it will close people out quickly. Now, those were 2 reward tanks. Let's talk about tech tree tanks that I like for tier 9 mediums in Frontline. Let's start out with the Leopard Pta, the sniper machine and mobility in spades. We have a 0.3 dispersion, 1.92 aiming time with an 8 degrees of gun depression plus 420 alpha. The DPM sitting at 2755 for my setup right there. This tank is going to get around the maps, and it is going to bring the sniper to bear. The thing you're going to want to watch out for here is obviously it doesn't have a whole bunch of armor, so you don't want to get into face-punching brawls. But as far as a gun platform that you can move all over the map on Frontline on those giant maps, the Leopard Pta is one of the best out there, and you should have great results maneuvering around, getting into good positions. I mean, look at this thing. It is doing 65 kilometers an hour. You're going to absolutely love this in Frontline. Well, you say you want some more armor and you don't particularly like the really soft old school sniper. Well, how about the old school beast, the T-54? This is still one of the best medium tanks at tier 9 in the game. Lots of mobility, a great turret. We take a look at the armor for the turret, and we are sitting at, as soon as I can find it, 240. Nice low slung tank, hard to hit, small target, great angling on the front of the hull, just an all-around beast, T-54, and this thing is going to do a lot of good for you in Frontline. Plus, it's going to bring a little armor to the fight, so a little more forgiving maybe than a Leopard Pta. In addition to that, if you're wanting to jump onto caps and do things like that, you're going to have a little bit more survivability with the T-54. And remember, they don't call it the Heat 54 for nothing. You can go ahead and drop some heat in there and do a bunch of pens, so you can start punching heavies in the face with the old Heat 54. 2600 average DPM. Gun depression is Soviet, right? We only have -5. You got to work around that. 0.31 dispersion, pretty good, and the aim time is nice and fast. Not bringing the high, 400 or 390 alpha, only at 320, but you're going to be spitting enough rounds downrange to still be in the 2600 DPM. So if you don't like the glass sniper and you want a little bit more oomph, the T-54 may be right up your alley for Frontline. What about autoloaders? Well, how about the standard B for an autoloader, the Italian tier 9 medium tank? I really like this one for Frontline, much like I like the Progetto 46 out there. The standard B is just its bigger brother, bringing a 360 alpha gun into the fight, the autoloader action going on, and a nice accuracy at 0.32 with a 2.28 aiming time, and a delicious -10 gun depression. This tank will use all of the map on Frontline very easily. And remember, mobility, we've been prioritizing that 65 kilometers an hour for this thing. We can really get around the map in the standard B and drop some serious pain on people. Remember though, this is the Italian style autoloader, so if I do get in a bind, I don't have to wait for everything to reload. I can go ahead and take this on as or use this as a single shot tank, and that's going to reduce my DPM, which is currently sitting at about 2,100. That's low because it is an auto reloader. I may have called it an autoloader earlier, but it's an auto reloader. Still, when you combine the burst capability and the mobility of this thing, you have a very capable tank. But remember, its turret and hull is not that good. You are not really a hull down turret fighter sitting there at only 60 millimeters on there. You're going to want to avoid as many shots as possible. But as far as being able to get around the large Frontline maps, this is one of the better tanks, one of the better medium tanks to do that. All right, let's take a look at some of the TDs I recommend. So TDs are an interesting case on Frontline. In general, you probably want to avoid most of them, but now that we have tier 9 and more capability to defend the turrets at the end of the match, you might start thinking about some of the bigger, slower TDs. The problem on attack with a slow TD is you may have trouble getting into position. So let's talk about a few of them. Number one is the reward K91. I include that because it is a reward tank and it does have a considerable amount of mobility on this thing. That's about the best that can be said for it. It is low slung. I'm just going to chuck it out there because, like I said, the TDs are a bit of a strange case, and my other two choices are very situational as well. My second one then is going to be the T30, and the T30 is just old school cool. Used to be a heavy, now it's a TD, fights a lot like a heavy, brings a 750 alpha boomstick into the fight, and this thing is going to work both on attack and defense. And it may be a better attack tank. While it's not super fast, it does have enough mobility to more or less keep up with other heavies. And again, you're bringing that 750 alpha gun into the game and a bunch of penetration. And this may just be the ticket for when you're attacking the end point on Frontline, trying to take out other tier 9 TDs on attack. You may want to grab yourself a T30 to start punching through things like T95s and the other big Tortoises, other big TDs. So have a think about that. I really like the T30 for Frontline, both offense and defense, but it just may be that offensive breakthrough tank that might be able to get you through some of those heavier tier 9 TDs that are camping, especially towards the end game on Frontline. 750 alpha, as I said, a very long reload, so it does take a while to get a shot down range. Minus 10 gun depression, an extremely good turret at 279 millimeters. Aim time is okay at 242. Dispersion is okay, but again, it's the 750 alpha you're looking for and the penetration that you're wanting to start punishing some of the other tier 9 TDs that are attempting to stave off the win from your attacking team. And actually pretty good on defense as well, especially if you can get to a hold down position. Let's look at the next one. So the Tortoise, as mentioned, is going to be one of those really tough tanks to take on when they're defending and trying to stop you from taking either a cap or one of the last gun emplacements to win the game. I don't really recommend the Tortoise on attack unless you are trying to break a really hard camp. It's just so slow, it's going to be really hard to get from zone to zone in a Tortoise. But on defense, especially towards the end of the game, this may be a game winner right here because it is spitting out 4,000 DPM or more. 400 average damage isn't great, but remember, this thing is about the amount of shells it puts downrange, not the amount of damage it does per shell, because altogether it is really kicking out some damage. Minus 10 gun depression. Also notice that the azimuth on the Tortoise is excellent, which makes it able to turn around corners and use different positions on these maps. 0.29 dispersion is fantastic. The aim time is insane at 1.45, so as a sniper, this is one of, if not the best, TD sniper. And because a lot of the engagement ranges on Frontline tend to be long, especially as guys are attempting to push through zones and attack the next zone, you're going to rack up some damage in the old Tortoise. Now, what you aren't going to do is be able to avoid their airstrikes and their artillery and things like that. But this may be just the ticket to break that last-minute attack that's attempting to destroy your gun emplacement down there. And mobility, like I said, is only 20. It's really slow. Let's take a look at another TD. On the opposite side of the T30 is the T95. Same 750 alpha gun, not nearly as flexible or mobile, but carrying a whole bunch more armor and a pretty respectable DPM, as I have it set up, of 2,964. Okay, gun depression at -5. That 750 alpha is great. The pen is outstanding, and the accuracy is pretty good too. 2.13 aiming time and 0.36 dispersion is no slouch. It's not a Tortoise sniper, but again, this is on the defensive side, guys. This thing, a couple of T95s holding off the hordes that are attacking those last few cannons, can really do some serious work. On the attack side, I would probably save a T95 for that last assault going after those cannons, but it is going to be a long drive to get into the fight, and you are extremely vulnerable out in the open attempting to push in a T95 to all the extra abilities that are in Frontline, so be very careful with that. So That's what I like in TDs. I didn't talk a whole bunch about some of the other more mobile or snipers, i.e. maybe the Waffentrager Panzer IV, the Object 263, which is actually quite mobile, the 704, decently mobile. Those are all situational and have their place in Frontline, but I talked about the ones I think that really have some really nice little niches in Frontline and can do some good work. Tier 9 has, because of the TDs at Tier 9 are so relatively powerful, the Tier 8s, they're almost all viable, but I gave you the ones I liked best. Let's look at light tanks, because this is a little bit of an interesting story for the Tier 9 light tanks. I had a hard time with the light tanks. Do I make wheeled tank one section and then light tanks? Do I include them together? They are more or less the same thing. Which one's best? The EBR. I mean, on Frontline, as big as the maps are, the EBR 90 is going to be and is an absolute monster towards the end game. The only good news there is because the attackers have to take a second level and the match is pretty mature by that time, the EBR 90s might not run quite as amok as they might if they were available at the very beginning. And on the defensive side, it's kind of neither here nor there. Yes, they can blast through the lines and get back to the enemy team's artillery or harass from the back, those kinds of things, but that's not necessarily game winning. It can be very annoying for the people who are getting harassed that way. But on the attack, when you're attempting to feel out the enemy, figure out where they are, take your forces from one side of the map to the other, the EBR 90 can be an absolute monster. So I like the EBR 90 for all the same reasons everyone likes the wheeled tanks at Tier 8. Let's talk track tanks. We're going to ignore the wheeled tanks for just a minute. My best all-rounder from a scout standpoint that's not a wheeled tank is going to be the T49. There's a small argument, I think, for the RU-251, but I'm going with the T49. I just like it as a better all-around tank, and I'm going to put the 90mm on it. The 152 derp gun is great for the memes. By all means, if that's your thing, go crazy. Have a nut on that. But I like the 90mm for more of a traditional scout role for the T49. We're looking at 2,900 average DPM with my setup, 2.06 aiming, 0.36 dispersion, and it's okay, I guess. This is not an armored beast. You almost have none. You do need to watch out for people lobbing HE at you, good stuff like that. But we are talking about a 65-kilometer-an-hour tank, and I really like the view range. Mine is set up at 438. There's a couple things I don't have going on, especially crew. You see that I don't have any crew up there in a lot of these tanks because they're in other tanks. But you can really get that view range out, and that can be quite useful in front lines, especially mid to late game, and I think more so mid game. The second level is sometimes a bit of a spotting game to make it work. So on attack, you may like to have yourself a few light tanks that can do some good spotting out there. Plus, they prioritize for the light tanks some of the capabilities like spotting. The spotting airplane, things like that. So I do like as the best all-rounder the T49 for Frontline. The last one I'm going to throw in there is the combat-oriented scout, the T54 lightweight, which is going to be flexible enough to do the scout thing, but will also be a fairly decent medium tank for you out there as well. You'll oh, but Guido, if I play a medium with good spotting range, it's better all around than a light tank. All right, probably. Just remember that your light tanks, the one big advantage your light tanks are having is they are carrying the same camo moving as they have not moving. Now, there's so many vehicles on the map, even though the maps are quite large, and there's so many special abilities and things like the spotting plane. Sometimes your actual scout camo gets a little bit lost in the mix, but it's still a bit of an advantage, and it can allow you to move around on the map a bit and not be spotted. And more so you can get into sniping positions on flanks and start wearing people down. And the nice thing about the 54 lightweight is it has a little bit of armor and capability to brawl. Not a lot, but a little bit more, especially more than the T49 out there. So I like it more as the combat-oriented. If you really want to go combat-oriented, the WZ-132A is a bit better, being closer to a medium out there. And the last one I'll chuck out, and I'm almost covering all the lights at this point. The 1390 is nice for the burst damage, but I just find it to be limited overall in the rest of its capabilities. The large maps and its derpy autoloader is a little bit difficult to use out there. And I love me some GSOR, some British light tanks, but it just doesn't really the pure spotting scout doesn't really have a good reason, I guess, to be on a Frontline map, in my opinion. So my last one's going to be the 54 lightweight. Well, all right, my friends, that's my list. My favorite Frontline Tier 9 tanks as it stands right now. Let me know what you think down below. What are your favorite Tier 9 tanks and why? I'd love to hear it, because as this is a learning channel, you may just say something that somebody else likes quite a bit down there and have a great reason for it. I tried to give you my reasons for my reasons for the reasons that I liked the tanks that I like, but I'm going to tell you, nearly any Tier 9 is going to work in Frontline, especially when you're beating up on Tier 8s. And all the Tier 9s, not every one of them, but pretty close, are actually pretty decent tanks. Tier 9 has been a nicely balanced tier for a long time. We are getting a little bit of crazy with some of the reward tanks, but right now it's still pretty nice. And I have enjoyed Tier 9 in Frontline more than I thought. That's what I'm going to say about it. I've enjoyed it more than I thought. Let me know what you think down below. If you like what you saw, go ahead and hit me up with a subscribe right there. And if you have any kind of advice on how to make this channel better, let me know down below. Let me know down below. Give me a like if you like it, a not like if you don't like it. If you don't not like it. I should redo this, but I'm not going to, because that's how we roll, my friends. Have a good one. We will see ya.